Hi crafters, Raquel here with Paints and Glitter. Today I'm coming along with a project for Paper Rose Studio. So here before me I have some supplies that I'll be using. This is the stamp that I'm going to be sharing with you. It's called Little Fairy Clear Stamp. I just thought it was so darling, so very sweet. I love the little scene here with a little girl, and then she's walking with a ladybug as if it were her little pet, and then surrounded by these very tall flowers. I'm also going to be using this tag collection called Stitched Tags Metal Die. Along with that, I also picked up this Etched Bloom 3 metal die. I thought these were really pretty, especially since it has the little centers that you can also cut out and a group of leaves. Then along with that, I picked up this gorgeous paper collection. It is 6x6. You get 18 double-sided pattern papers, 3 each of 12 designs. And they are printed on 200 GSM paper, and it's called Bees and Butterfly Basics. I couldn't pass this up. By the way, there is a separate one that is 12 by 12. There are die cut aparts, there's ephemera, and I highly suggest you look into it because it's a really adorable collection, perfect for spring projects. So I'm going to open this up and then we can take a peek at the papers together. So if you're not familiar with Paper Rose, this is an Australian company, and the items that I'm going to mention in this video, of course, will be linked in the description bar below. The links are affiliate links, so if you choose to use them, then of course it'll support my channel with a small percentage. So here, this little piece here right off the bat is just so cute. So this is a cut apart sheet, and as you can tell, there are little sentiments. This one says sweet as honey. Life is sweet. Then there's 4 sentiments here. There are little tags here, and then if you'd like to, you can cut them apart so that they have that little hexagonal shape. This one here has the little bee, and it says be happy, and then life and bloom, and then some little butterflies, and a small little basket there of flowers. This also has the background that has the wooden planks, so very nice neutral. All of the little bees here make the background of this paper with a nice creamy background, but on the edges it's actually a little bit darker, so I don't know if you'll be able to see that in the video, but it does look as if it were inked a little bit on the edge there. And then on this one, there's the honeycomb here with a little bee on top, surrounded by flowers, a little bit more honeycomb on that little corner. This is absolutely stunning, and this is one of the reasons I wanted this paper, was because I love yellow flowers, and this one has all of the little butterflies back here as well. It is just so pretty, and I love the intensity of the colors from Paper Rose, so I've been very pleased with all of the papers so far. So look at this one. It's got the larger bumblebee here on the background that has some actually writing as if it were old newspaper. And then the little flowers and honeycomb strategically placed. There's these polka dots. So I like that it also has these kind of basics. So very pretty. And then this one's got the little honey jar and also the little scoop, I guess is what you would call that, with all the little bees and little flowers. And then here's a creamy colored background. This also has as if it were newspaper in the background, and then those flowers that are actually a very pretty white rose. So darling. So let's compare that one to this one, so that way you get to see how they're both equally intense in color, but of course this one's that white rose versus the yellow. Open plaid background. I know there's a word for that, but I can't recall what it is right now. It's not technically plaid, but it's got these little flowers on the side with some wheat also and grasses, and then the green checkered. So very cute, and of course it's going to repeat itself over and over again. So again, you get 3 of each, so that way you have plenty to work with. So I will start getting this ready, and I will be sharing a tutorial with you today, so that if you'd like to, you can go ahead and follow along. I'm going to be narrating what I'll be doing here today. So to begin, I'm taking the cover from the Bees and Butterfly Basics. And of course, this is meant to give you an idea of the papers included inside. But what I'll be doing is taking advantage of these smaller prints, and I'll be using the Little Fairy Clear stamp and strategically placing it here with my stamp platform So that way I can get this image to be stamped out of these smaller little patterns. I am using a hybrid ink in black from Paper Rose, and as you see here, I'm just going to be placing the stamp where I want the image to be located. And this is because I'm going to be doing some paper piecing. And the great thing about, of course, having a repositionable platform is that if you don't get a clear image the first time around, you get to stamp that as many times as you like. There's also a carrier sheet included with your stamps. And this is very helpful because it can give you an idea of the size and the location of the stamp before you even apply this onto your paper. So that's another little hint I can give you there. Now what I'm going to be doing is selecting from these paper, or from this paper, I'm sorry, the little portions that I think will work really great, and here is the result of that. I've gone ahead and cut out several by just fussy cutting the little images, and now using the little die from, or I'm sorry, the largest die from the tag collection, I've also gone ahead and cut into one of the papers strategically so that I could have the center portion that's quite clear. So that was the one with the bee image on one corner that has the little honeycomb. But now what I'm going to do is stamp this image in its entirety right onto this tag. And some of it will overlap, so it won't stamp the entire image, but that's okay. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm actually going to be stamping this multiple times, and I apologize that my hair got in the way there, but I was trying to see the image and it's a little bit difficult when you're stamping and trying to film at the same time. But again, here I got my clear image, and I'm going to stamp this the number of times needed to make sure that I get a really concise image here. And once that's done, what I'll be doing is taking those little cut aparts, those little pieces of paper that I had stamped previously, and then place them on top of my image. And what's neat about this paper piecing style is that you can create images, in this case these pretty flowers, with different styles, different textures, and it's all going to be cohesive because it will match the papers that you've already selected. But the other part is that you can definitely color onto the papers as well as onto the image. So again, I had stamped this onto one of the papers from the collection, but as you see here, I am using alcohol markers. In this case, it's YG03, which is a yellow-green. And I'm able to color in that stamped image with no problem, especially because I used a hybrid ink. So that's going to be very important if you're using this technique, is that you want to use an ink that will not compete with the alcohol marker. And what I mean by that is that the formulation has to be one that won't get erased or blurred if you add a color from an alcohol marker. So this one's YG17, and these happen to be Copics, but they don't have to be. This is just a darker yellow-green. And what I'm doing here, of course, is coloring in the little stems and the bases of the flowers. And what I've done is, because I fussy cut the little petals of the flowers, then I still can color the base of the flowers. So if you see the little flower on the top left-hand corner of your screen, you may notice what it is I'm referring to. Then what I'm doing is, for the base of this little image, I'm using a YG67, which happens to just be, again, a darker yellow-green. And because this is a trio of greens that are close in color, then they will blend perfectly. But the point here is that you use colors that you enjoy, that you like on the image, and that also match your project. So the reason I went with these colors was because it did match perfectly the colors in the green paper that I'll be using in a moment to frame out this image. So that's what I love about also paper collections, is that if you're at a loss for ideas in terms of what colors to use in your stamped images, you can always refer to a paper collection, especially one from Paper Rose, because they always have coordinating images with their double-sided papers. So For instance, you can get one collection that has more of the cutesy images that will be part of the background, but then you flip that paper over and you have a basic type of design, such as the checkered papers that you see here. So here I'm using a gel pen, and this is a white gel pen, just to add highlights again to that flower. I realize there's a lot of green here right now, but I'm going to be switching this up in a minute. Of course, if you prefer to use pencils, you can do that. It's really dependent on the type of paper that you're using, what you can add to this, but I did start out with these alcohol markers because I thought that they lent the perfect amount of shading, for instance. So here I'm moving on to the little hat. I had started out with a little bee pattern paper, but the pattern kind of got lost, so it wasn't doing much. So I switched it out for that little polka dot one instead, and then proceeded to color in her hair. So I'm just taking some deeper browns now, carefully going around her little face. I'm also coloring in the little papers that I had cut out that make up her little outfit. And the other thing that you can do, of course, is to alter these papers with foil. So what I'm doing here is using a glue pen. So this pen has a tip just like a regular pen, however, it has adhesive inside, and so you can strategically use this to add adhesive to your paper. And then as you see there, I have a piece of gold foil. Of course, this could be any color foil. So here on the very tiny details, such as her dress where she has a little heart, she has a fairy wing, there are little flowers in the background, that I'm simply going to rub this foil right onto those little images, and it's going to have a little edge, for instance, that's nice and golden. The little heart will now shine. And so this is yet again another technique that you can use to alter your papers to make them suit the design that you like and the look that you're going for. So this is very subtle. It's not going to overpower the stamped image by any means because I'm not adding a whole lot of it. But if you would like to, you could certainly color in an entire flower and do the whole thing in gold. So here, case in point, is how I'm going to be coloring one of the flowers using an alcohol marker that is in an orange color. Now the colors in themselves, of course, don't truly matter so long as you like what they look like. And here I'm just blending this out with a lighter orange, and if you can tell, I'm not coloring every single petal either, so you can actually see it a little bit better on the back side of that paper. But there we are. Now you can see how I did color the little tiny details in the green using the alcohol marker, and then I also got to have those little petals in that pretty plaid yellow. So here, using a marker that is an E70 from Copic, I'm actually going around the entire image. And the reason that I'm doing this is to add a little bit of depth to this stamped image. So if you first look at the image, it looks a little bit flat because you are looking at an image that's mostly cream color. And what I wanted to do is that because I didn't color the background with a blue or a green or anything like that, then to make it stand out a little bit more visually, I did go around the entire stamped image with this color. Now this is a neutral, so it's a little bit on the rose tint. I don't know how to describe it other than to say it's a little bit on the pink side, but it's a neutral. So again, it matches the background very nicely, but it also gave it just a tiny bit of a shadow. So here I'm proceeding to add all of the other little layers that are going to form the complete image of this darling little fairy. And she's so very delicate and pretty. I thought this image, just something about it spoke to me. I thought it was so, so sweet. And so here's her little outfit completely colored, and I did have a little bit of a space there. I guess I could have cut into it a little bit differently, but
you know, you have to practice forgiveness if you don't color everything perfectly or cut everything perfectly. So I just went with it. And then here with the flowers, the other cool thing that you can do is that you don't have to adhere them completely flat. Now, in the more delicate little areas where you've fussy cut super tiny details, then of course you want to adhere those flat. But where there's a little petal, for instance, that curls or something like that, you can definitely add dimensional adhesive, and that's exactly what I did. I added some little foam squares behind some of the petals, and you'll notice that a little later on. Here I'm using a Y21, which is a very light yellow, to again add a little more depth to that one die cut. And I'm again revisiting the image with a little bit of white ink where necessary. And now I'm adding a bit of red because she does have a little friend here. Her little mascot is a ladybug. So I wanted to incorporate that color. Now the paper collection does not have any red in it. However, because this is an accent color and all of the colors in the paper collection are neutrals anyway, and red is a neutral, then this is no big deal. You can add as much red as you like to. So what I've done here is I've also colored the little stones and the little dots on the ladybug, sorry. I was thinking in Spanish for a second there. Then I went ahead and added the little dots to the ladybug in that soft creamy brown, and then added some pink to her cheeks and a very light color. It looks like a yellow. It's called eggshell. I added that tiny bit to her face just to blend out the pink. And then when I was happy with that, because I added the red to the ladybug, I wanted this to then be an accent color on this card. And I thought, okay, then definitely I want to add this to at least a couple of the flowers. So what I'm doing here is adding this color with little flick motions, if you will. And that's just to be able to then blend it out. Now, this is not alcohol paper, obviously, the type that you would use for alcohol coloring. This is just regular 200 GSM cardstock. However, because it is a heavier weight paper, it's not 65 pound, for instance, then it actually does take this ink on very nicely. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing a ton of coloring, like a really huge image, but I was actually very pleasantly surprised with the fact that it did take on the amount of alcohol ink that I added to the little flowers and everything else, and it blended nicely. It didn't have too many brush strokes, but that just goes without saying that, you know, you can definitely use the techniques that you like. Now I'm adding a couple more tags, and in this instance what I decided to do was to use the same stamp, and the background in this case is the one that looks like the wood planks, is what I had described it as before. Um, but as you can see, it's not the entire image that I'm stamping. Now, this is the second one, and I wanted to have you see how it is that I'm doing this. I actually tilted the stamp a little bit, and once I have that image in its entirety on the piece of card here, then I will be using that along with the second one that I had already shown you a second ago. So this is what that looks like. And as you can see there, now I have this bigger bouquet of flowers, and what I will do is use the same exact technique by coloring in a few of the flowers. All of the background is going to be colored exactly the same way with the 3 different colors of green. The flower is also going to be different colors of red. And on some of the flowers, I'll be repeating the same technique of stamping the same exact image onto the rest of that paper I had shown you, and then fussy cutting out the details and also applying them as a layer right on top of the flower image. So that way this can all be nice and cohesive. I'm also going to be adding the little bit of shadow with that neutral color E70. Now here is the rest of what will compose this card, and what I've done is that using that large tag you can flip this over onto an already cut piece of card. And this is what I love about this type of die set, is that if you want to change the shape of your papers, you don't have to use them in only one direction. So here I was determining how the layout's going to go, and I decided that using a 7x7 top folding card, I'm going to be adding this gorgeous layer here. This has some spray, and it's actually a really beautiful green. It's called Wispy Willow by Nuvo, and it's a sparkle spray, so I was trying to show the shine on this paper. And this is going to create the base, and the reason I did this is because I wanted a little bit more green in the background, but I didn't want it to be very dark. I didn't want it to be ink either, and I just decided that the sparkle spray would be really darling. So then here, using the smallest little tag in the set, I cut out several pieces of this polka dot paper that has that yellow on cream. I thought this would be really pretty as a background, of course. And because the paper has a subtle design, then it won't compete with all of the other layers that I'll be adding onto it. So I spaced this out to be about 1/8 of an inch away from each edge, and then the remaining tags are 1/2 an inch away from each other. And what I did is to use the grid in the background on my table here to determine the distance between each one of these little tags. So that makes it a whole lot easier there. And once those were placed, then I went ahead and began layering the rest of the image. So here again is that stamped floral image. I'm going to be layering this on top of that checkered pattern tag. And I'm trying to make sure that there's an equal amount of border all the way around. So because these are graduated in sizes, then it makes it a whole lot easier to position these. And then the main image is going to be right in the center of this card. Now, because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to also decorate this further, I went ahead and only added adhesive on the top and bottom of these two tags. Then on the center portion here, I want to make sure that I cover the images that I didn't want to see, but I also went ahead and added dimensional adhesive here. And that way I could decorate this further if I wanted to add a little bit more volume using the flower die cuts. So here what I've done is use that darling set of flower dies, and I've gone ahead and cut out other papers, not from the collection, but just papers that I thought matched really nicely. In fact, I think the leaves were the only thing that were part of this collection. But I've gone ahead, and as you can see here, I've also altered these using a green alcohol marker. And then the other little flowers here, what I wanted to do was to match them up with the colors I had already used on that stamped image. However, the pink paper I had cut out was a fuchsia pink. And what I did is that I altered that paper by coloring it with an orange marker. And that's pretty basic. You can just change the color to whatever suits you, and that's that orange marker I was kind of pointing out. I also added little highlights with a white gel pen, and I love all of the details in these flower dies, and in fact you're going to see a little bit more of this because I do have two more cards to show you in which the flowers are going to be pretty prominent. So what I wanted to do here, of course, was to match this to what I had already colored. I didn't want to take away anything, but here's that die set. And you can see that there are some really pretty centers. And so what I did there was that I colored the centers, as I said before, with gel pens, with alcohol markers. I went ahead and added a little bit of green to one of those centers, a little bit of white. And this is just a wonderful way to transform your papers to make them look cohesive with what you've already used on your card base. And so there I'm showing you the different size centers that you can use. So basically, this die set I think is one that I'll be revisiting because it just has so much potential. It's amazing how one little die set can really transform the look of a project or a card. And I really enjoyed using this die set because it has a lot of the little details that the dies themselves will cut into the paper. So if you left this alone and added absolutely no color, it would be fine, but I just went ahead and highlighted a few of the features. Now here there are some cut apart sentiments, and what I decided to do was to cut one of them down as a little flag so that I could use it as a shadow. So there I was just deciding on the color to use, but I went ahead and cut one of these little strips. So if you see there, you can see how much I took advantage of that paper. It's just amazing how much of it I was able to use. And then I decided upon the sentiment that reads golden moments. I thought it was appropriate for all of the little bits of shine that I'll be adding to this card, and also just the little scene of that little girl walking with her little ladybug. I just think it's so darling. So I'm going to be adding this to the front, and what I wanted to do was to make sure that it didn't look as if it were just kind of lost on there. So when I placed it, I thought, no, this doesn't look right. It needs a little something more. So I added a little bit of height to it so that it would overlap with that main panel, which is of course the center one with the little girl stamped on it. So there I just added some adhesive, and I thought that that made all the difference. So that way the sentiment is not just kind of in the background there. So I hope that makes sense. And now I'm really happy with this. However, I love shine, and any excuse to use it is just going to be my reason for it. So here, what I'm doing is also adding some glitter nouveau drops onto this card because, of course, this is a bee-themed paper collection. And so what I wanted to do was add a little tiny hint of gold here and there. I had already done so with that tiny bit of foil, so what I did was to revisit a lot of it using the Nouveau drops as well. And the texture from the glitter drop is wonderful. Sometimes the little bottles, however, get clogged because of the differences in temperature here. I happen to live in a cold climate. What I do is I take the drop out with a paintbrush, and it is a whole lot easier. I just use it as if it were paint, and paints and glitter. So here we are. Oh gosh. I don't go overboard with it, of course, but this is the result. I absolutely love it. Here's a little bit more of a close-up. The intensity of the color is so much fun. I really enjoyed making this card, and now I have two more to show you. So if you want to stick around, I'm going to keep working. All right, so let's move on to these smaller cards. I have these, and I'm using the tags again because I really like this combination. The little tags, the little flowers, and these darling papers. So now what I decided to do was take a top folding card, and I created these that are 4 by 6. And I was going to make them a little bit smaller, but I decided no, I need a little more real estate. So here's that cut apart paper. I had a little strip left over, but I wanted to show you the versatility again of these dies. They have that darling stitched border, so why not take advantage of it? So here I'm placing it on top of that strip. Now you could leave it as is, but why would you if you can just add a little more texture? So what I'm doing here is that I've cut it, I'm flipping it over and adding that same die, again matching what I had already cut. And if you see there, I wanted to show you, it is going to overlap, and one portion has already been cut, so you don't really need to revisit that. But you can create unique shapes using these very simple die shapes. So here we are. That's the result. That was the point I was trying to make. And I think that looks really neat. Now, of course, I'll be layering this, but if you wanted just an idea of a little flag that you could add to the front of a card, you could leave that as is and just add a little sentiment and a tiny little die cut and be done with it. In my case, I'm going to keep layering because I just love doing so. I've got some watercolor card. I've got other little snippets of paper that I have left over, and I'm going to take advantage of all of them, including this little bee image. So here I did the same thing. I took that die, I placed it on top of my paper, cut it twice, and I got that stitched edge all the way around. I'm adding this little topper that you can use for the tags. And now I'm simply going to layer all of these together to create my little card scene. And what I did is to cut this panel down in particular to leave about an eighth of an inch border, or I should say 16th of an inch border. And I didn't want to leave behind my pretty little butterflies here. So again, I'm revisiting this with that die, getting a stitched edge. I want it all to be cohesive, and this is such an easy and simple way to do so. So there we are, I have one edge, and then I'm flipping that same die over, and I'll be able to get the opposite edge with that stitch border. Now obviously this is taking away a portion of the image whenever you cut into it. However, if you are happy with how it looks, then that's all that matters. So here I'm adding this to the side of this tag, and there I got my three little butterflies. I think it looks so pretty, and that paper with the roses is just so gorgeous. I'm overlapping these topsy-turvy because I'm purposely using as many layers as possible here. So I want them to all have a little bit of an opportunity to shine, and I'm meeting up the angles on the top and then adding adhesive to the back so that I can place this right on the front here. So this is going to layer flat, but you can still see visually all of the different textures. And then I'm adding the white tag, which by the way, I did cut out using watercolor card so that it would be nice and sturdy. And the die set does include the piece that you can use to cut out the little hole in the tags. I just omitted that this time around. But now I'm layering that Be Happy sentiment with that gorgeous little bee on the front, which by the way, if you like that image and you would prefer to see that in a smaller or larger scale, you can get the die cut pieces from Paper Rose. And as you can see here, I'm just layering that with a little bit more dimension with the foam adhesive. I'm going to add that again, a little bit topsy-turvy, so add an angle. And once I add that, I'm going to continue decorating this with all of these gorgeous flowers that I have cut out using the watercolor card that I mentioned. Now here I have some spray again. There's a lot of yellow in these cards and I wanted to take advantage of that. So what I'm doing is that I'm going to first color this using a watercolor pencil. This happens to be from Derwent, and it is a very saturated, or very pigmented is what I should say, pencil. So all you have to do is color onto your paper in this manner if you would like to. Later on I'm going to show you a different way that you can use these, but you can just color on them as if you were using a crayon, if you will. And then after you do this, you can wet the paper as much or as little as you like. Here what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet this brush. I'm going to saturate it as much as possible, but you could just use a water brush instead if you would like to. And now you're going to see how pigmented these pencils are. So depending of course on the look that you're going for, you may want to have a very vibrant little flower there. I'm going to be creating a little more of a subtle look, even though initially it looks very bright. But all I'm doing is, again, wetting every single one of these and making sure that that color gets spread all around the centers, but I am avoiding the edges. And I'm also going to be coloring the leaves. Now that's a very tiny amount of yellow, so it won't make a huge difference. But what I'm going to do with this is that I'm also going to complement this color with a bit of that mica mist is what it's called, and it's a gold. It's called aspen gold, so it's a very pretty pearlescent kind of gold. It's not too yellow, and that's going to be what makes these little flowers stand out. And what I was showing you there is that I'm popping up the centers using dimensional adhesives, and that's easy enough. But I just love the fact that you can do that. to add a little element there of depth onto these flowers. And here I'm using the centers of those little tag, I don't know what those are called. Reinforcements. So the little centers that fell out, I'm actually going to use as a little highlight onto these little flowers. So why let it go to waste? If you can use it, then go ahead and do so. So here I'm strategically placing those tiny little pieces of yellow paper. So now I'm going to decorate the front of this card. I'm selecting here where to place these darling little flowers. And again, it's just going to highlight a little bit of the fact that there are florals in the paper. There's a little bee there that has flowers in her hand, and then the soft look of those flowers made out of that watercolor paper will just add a little something extra to this card. Let's move on to our second card. It's going to be very similar this time around. However, I did choose to frame out that darling little basket of flowers using one of the frames from the Lots and Lots of Squares 2.0. And that's the one with the little hearts. You may have seen that already on this channel, and that's because I did use it on a Valentine project, and it does cut out the tiniest little hearts onto that paper. But I'm also going to be including the little sentiment here that says life in bloom. So I'm actually going to tuck this in to that frame. And that did come from that other little image I was pointing out with the little bee and the flower. I again just cut them apart to suit my tastes, and I was able to retain the image of that little bee, but I also was able to use the sentiment separately. So I love being able to alter my die cuts or my papers as I need to. I'm going to be using the same checkered background, the same color of that rose background with the tag. This time around I'm using another medium-sized tag. I'm also using that little yellow hole reinforcer to add that pop of color. I'm also using the tiniest little tag in this collection. Now this one is going to be a layer for that little image with the bee. However, I'm using a darker yellow here for the whole reinforcer and using that just right along the edge of that. So as you can tell, I didn't actually cut any holes into these tags, but again, that's personal preference. So here what I noticed is that my one little white tag was actually missing a part of the edge. I don't know what I did there, but I didn't want to let go of that. I wanted to definitely use it, so I'm just strategically placing it on my card, and no one will know because it's going to be covered with this darling image of that rose filled basket. So that's what I was pointing out there. Just because you make a small error does not mean that you are having to cut everything over again. Just shift your papers over a little bit. But here is that darling little image, the little bee visiting the yellow flower, to kind of give you a little bit more of a detailed look as if you had zoomed in with a camera. So if you notice, the background has the larger roses. The middle ground of this card has the basket with the roses. And lastly, there is the image of the bee on the little yellow rose. So here again, I am going to be scattering some of these darling flowers all around this card. The difference is that I'm going to be using a little bit of a combination of yellow and orange on the flowers because I want to highlight the colors that I had selected for the little die cuts here. So if you can tell, they're a little bit darker. I'm starting out with the yellow. Now I had mentioned previously that you can color with these pencils right onto your paper. The other option is to wet the brush and pick up the color from the pencil with the brush instead. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. And of course you can blend this out as you like to. So what I do is that I pick up a bit more water with that watercolor brush and then add the color onto, the water onto the paper, and then that way I can blend out that intensity of color. So it's another technique, and I know it may seem as if it's the same thing, but I promise you it's not. So you can pick up as much or as little of that color. So here I'm again using the darker color toward the center, Now, what's really fun about this, of course, is that because the die will cut the paper, it creates these little channels, and so the moment that water hits it, the color will travel. What I did here is that I added the color, and then that dark intense orange did travel through those little channels of that flower, so it actually did some of the work for me. But here I'm using a brown, and again, because I want this to be a little bit darker than the previous flowers, then I'm layering that light brown color onto that watercolor card. And here, as I mentioned before, you can create a little more intensity. It depends on how much of that paint you actually want to use on your paper. Here you can give it a more customized look. So I highly recommend that. Mixing and matching different types of papers onto your cards will give you a really beautiful result. So I highly recommend it. And of course, on this channel, anything painting is going to be my preference. Can't stay away from it. So here I'm just adding a little bit more yellow to these tiny little flowers and a little bit more brown, because you can definitely kind of mute down the yellow just by doing a wash of brown. Now I know this video is sped up, and I did this because of course it's a quite long video, but if you have any questions regarding painting onto paper, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever tried this type of technique? Have you ever even cut a die out of watercolor paper? Is it something that you enjoy? And by the way, I am using cold press watercolor card. I try to use the thickest one that I can find. I do get mine at either an art supply store, or you can definitely get it from Blick art. So I will leave that linked down below if you're interested. That way you can get a hold of some good watercolor card. If I find any other ones, then I'll link them as well. But here goes the little flowers. Once they're nice and dry, you can add them onto the front of your card. And of course, this has been a process video. I don't always make them like this, but I wanted to describe what I was doing so that way, in case you had never made cards in this type of style or with these techniques, so that you could see the different ways in which you could create pretty flowers for your cards, perfect for spring, and with a lot of different mediums, because you can layer every single one of these, and because they're all water based, and in this case with the exception of course of the alcohol markers, then they will all work perfectly together. So the idea of course is to match with the colors that you already have in the beautiful papers from Paper Rose, and then the rest is just a matter of having fun. So here again, I'm coloring the leaves in this instance using some of that same spray I had previously used for the background of the larger card. So that is a sparkle spray in Wispy Willow, and that changed the look of the one little cluster of leaves. This is just going to layer together, and what I wanted to do was to match the leaves to the ones in the basket. Now I found that 3 were too much for that tiny little space, so I just cut one away, and then I'll be adding the one leftover leaf to the upper right hand corner of this card, and that is easy enough. So I hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial. I do look forward to reading your comments. Let me know if you have enjoyed this type of process video. Do you enjoy watching longer videos like these, or if you like to watch a longer one such as this one to gain ideas? But my hopes is that you do like to see the content so that you can gain some inspiration and just be encouraged to use the supplies that you have. That's one thing that I'm always reiterating on this channel, is that if you do purchase any of the items, especially using my links, then please use it. Don't let it sit on a shelf. I know that sometimes it's hard to get motivated to use your supplies. We all have those days, myself included, but by all means, I hope that these videos give you some ideas, and that way you can get started using your supplies and send a friend something nice. A little note just to say hello is always cheerful for anyone. So here I added a little green to each one of these. In the end of this video, or on the end of this video, you're going to see some photos as well, and that way you get to have a little bit more of a close-up of what these will look like. Once they're dry, they do dry with a dome finish, so they'll end up looking like tiny little pearls, and the size of the pearl is up to you. And you can always revisit them with the same stylus if you'd like to. So thank you again for watching. Don't forget all of the affiliate links are in the description bar of this video, and I look forward to sharing future videos with you from Paper Rose. They are so much fun to work with. The supplies are just absolutely darling, and so are the dies. I hope to see you in my next video. Be inspired and be blessed, and thank you so much for watching.